countryside. Mud and weed can be very revealing. The researchers will take accurate recordings that can be repeated in the future, so scientists can go back and register the rise and decline of species and plants. It's a cold clinical analysis. Passion plays no part. But for others, the countryside is an emotional issue.
Henry VI came here after the Battle of Hexham, and he left his drinking bowl behind, saying as long as it should remain quite whole and unbroken, the Penningtons would always be living and thriving at Manchester.
Patrick Gordon Duff Pennington's family own Manchester Castle in Cumbria. As a landowner and leading member of the Lake District National Park Board, he has considerable influence on the view from his castle window.
Well, this is the view that Ruskin called Heaven's Gate. Edward VII said it was the finest view in Europe. My wife's family has been here since 1200. The view itself, though, which has changed over the years, the trees on the left, my father-in-law planted in the days when nobody seemed to worry about forest design, and I think they're pretty ugly. Scawfell is unfortunately in the clouds today, but that's one thing that hasn't changed. The fields have changed very greatly. When I came here in 1955, they were covered with rushes. There was a field of oats here, a field of turnips there, and small dairy herds. Now there's just one dairy herd. But on the whole, I think the landscape has kept itself remarkably beautifully.
But there has been this continual change and a process that's continuing now.
Yes. Of course, living in the middle of it, you don't notice it so much. We have started cutting some of the 1783 trees down in the garden. I expected everybody to say, damn butcher, because that was what people do say. But I walked up the drive one day and I saw two little women doing like this, and the saw saying, wonderful, funny pattern. So, and where we have cut holes in the canopy, things are scarred, they're coming scarred for ages.
But when it comes to the landscape, you also have to take into account the changes in agriculture. Are we going to see big changes here, and will that affect the way that this countryside looks?
If society wants a landscape that it is not viable to farm, and if that landscape needs to be maintained, society, out of the taxation system, has got to make it possible for these people to stay in these small farms. Otherwise, they're going to have to go, and the small farms will be amalgamated, the buildings that are left will be used as holiday houses, there won't be enough people to maintain the landscape the way it is. And I think that would be disastrous.
Do you think it's as simple as that? If we say we want to preserve the Lake District the way it is now, that the government should pay?
Yes. I think society should pay. And what is very objectionable to people, say, farming in the farm over there, if people come for a week's holiday and say, it's absolutely disgraceful what's happening to the landscape, I mean, look at that beautiful landscape and think what you farmers are about to do. I heard someone say this one day. It's the farmers, actually, made the landscape, and it is very hurtful. And then these people go back near the centre of power, and they pose as the experts, and it's hellish, because they've only been there for a fortnight's holiday, and they pose as the experts over and above the people who have to make their living on the spot. And I feel quite bitter about it. I always have.
Over the next few years, however, we are going to see big changes in the landscape as a result of agricultural policies like the set-aside scheme. The Countryside Survey will pick up those changes and provide politicians with a factual framework on which to base their decisions.
It helps them by giving them objective information with a good scientific base, which will be able then to demonstrate to them and to the population as a whole that we've got this policy right, or that other policies, in fact, could be developed in certain directions.
As I say, the biggest problem, grading.
Meanwhile, the training course is back in the classroom, learning a whole new grammar. For instance, when does a clump of trees become a wood, and what constitutes a well-managed forest?
No problem with that one?
It's very difficult in a widespread survey of this sort to produce accurate and precise definitions for every single feature. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, but it is difficult. We give fairly tight guidelines. There's a little bit of initiative needed by the surveyors to interpret everything they see. We can't provide, for instance, coded or codes for every type of feature. We have to provide a series of options and ask them to, as it were, slot the feature into one of a series of categories or pigeonholes.
On the face of it, this is a straightforward fence, quite common really, but to the surveyors, it's a string of numbers.
It's a wire fence
313. Oh yes, we want the description of height of the fence, less than 2 metres, but probably over a metre, so that's 342. And stock-proof, if you got the stock-proof code in, 351.
When I first started working with ITE way back in 1970, it was said that for every hour you spend in the field, you spend 10 hours analysing. I think that has changed, that ratio, because of the advance in technology and the way we're able to capture data more easily. But in this case, it's a 2-year project, and the survey element will take 4 months, so that gives you some sort of idea of the balance.
A sophisticated computer system allows the results to be shown in a simple way. Until recently, it was impossible to handle millions of pieces of data in this way. But advances in computer design mean we can now clearly see how the landscape has changed.
The first map shows land use in 1978. As you can see, there's a wide variety of agricultural land use types here. We have mustard, the yellow in the middle, barley, wheat, grass lay. The second map is land use in 1984. You can see there's been quite a reduction in the land cover types here. We've got great areas of wheat and also some newly planted woodland.
The Countryside Survey will tell us what's really happening to the British landscape. But what use we make of that information ultimately depends on the planners, the politicians and their advisors.
There are very large numbers of money at stake in the management of the countryside through farming, and we need to know whether this is damaging our environment or not, because the Department of Environment has responsibility for wildlife policies on the one hand and the landscape aspects of our environment, as well as pollution control, and as well as supporting people's uses of the countryside. We don't want to restrict use, but at the same time we want to be able to ensure that we're passing on to future generations the best possible rural countryside.
Well, that survey is now underway, and we'll be keeping an eye on it on Countryfile during the next couple of years. And that's all for this week. Until next week, goodbye.